They say funerals reveal who people really are. But I never expected my grandfather's funeral to reveal that my own father was capable of such calculated cruelty. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral as I stood in the corner, watching my father Marcus perform what could only be described as theater. His expensive Italian suit was perfectly tailored, his expression a masterpiece of manufactured grief, and his handshakes with business partners were timed with surgical precision. Every tear seemed calculated, every sob strategically placed for maximum impact on the assembled crowd of investors, politicians, and media representatives. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the weight of genuine loss in my chest. Grandfather Jonathan had been more than family to me. He was my mentor, my protector, and the only person who truly understood my dreams of carrying on the Vance legacy. While my father saw dollar signs, I saw opportunity to build something meaningful. While Marcus viewed every relationship as a transaction, I had learned from Jonathan that true wealth came from creating value for others. Serafina stood beside my father, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. She wore black Chanel, her platinum blonde hair styled in what she probably thought was respectful, morning chic. But her eyes held the unmistakable gleam of victory. At 35, she was only 8 years older than me, a fact that had always made family gatherings awkward. But today, her smile barely concealed, told me everything I needed to know about what she thought this funeral meant for her future. After the service ended and the last of the mourners had filed out into the New York rain, I found myself following my father and Serafina back to the Vance family mansion on the Upper East Side. The imposing limestone building had been my home for 23 years. But as we walked through the mahogany-paneled halls toward grandfather's study, something felt different. The air seemed thicker, charged with an anticipation that made my skin crawl. My father went straight to the crystal decanter on grandfather's desk and poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan. He didn't offer me any. Serafina perched on the leather sofa like a cat who had just caught a particularly fat mouse, her eyes never leaving Marcus as he savored his first sip. "Finally," he said, rolling the amber liquid around his glass. "Everything is exactly where it should be. $400 million. All of it mine." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had expected grief. Perhaps some discussion of grandfather's wishes. Maybe even a conversation about how we would honor his memory. Instead, I was witnessing a celebration. "That's grandfather's legacy," I said quietly, my voice barely steady. The money was never the point. He built something that mattered. Marcus turned to look at me, and for the first time since childhood, I saw him truly see me, not as his daughter, not as Jonathan's beloved granddaughter, but as an obstacle to his plans. His laugh was sharp and cold, cutting through the study like broken glass. "Legacy?" He set down his whiskey and moved closer to me. "Olivia, that money is a tool. It's power. It's freedom. And you, my dear daughter, have always been nothing but a disappointing investment. A complete waste of resources." The casual cruelty in his voice was stunning. I had always known my father was ambitious, perhaps ruthless in business, but I had never heard him speak about me with such open contempt. Serafina's smile widened as she watched our exchange, clearly enjoying every moment of my humiliation. "Marcus, honey," she purred from her position on the sofa, "Olivia just gets in your way. She's always been too idealistic, too naive for this world. Maybe it's time to clean house." My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a prepaid credit card, which he threw onto grandfather's antique desk with deliberate carelessness. The plastic card skittered across the polished wood surface and came to rest near a framed photo of my grandfather and me from my college graduation. "There's $5,000 on that card," Marcus said, his tone suggesting he thought he was being generous. "Pack your things and be out of this house before midnight. Security will help you if you need assistance with your belongings." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of thunder outside. I stared at the credit card, then at the photograph of my grandfather, and something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, sharp and immediate. But alongside it came something else. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I could see my father exactly as he was, without the filter of daughterly love or desperate hope for his approval. I walked to the desk and picked up the credit card. For a moment, Marcus looked satisfied, perhaps thinking I would take his money and disappear quietly. Instead, I snapped the card in half and threw the pieces back at his feet. "I don't need your money," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I never did." Marcus's face darkened, and he gestured toward the door. Two security guards appeared as if they had been waiting for this moment. They were professionals, large and intimidating, but they moved with the restraint of men who knew they were being watched by important people. Still, their hands on my arms were firm enough to leave marks as they escorted me from the study, past the portraits of 4 generations of Vance family members, and out into the cold Manhattan rain. I stood on the sidewalk in my funeral dress, watching the iron gates of my childhood home close behind me with a sound like a prison door slamming shut. The rain soaked through my black wool coat within minutes, but I barely felt it. Everything I had believed about my family, about my place in the world, had just been stripped away in the span of 20 minutes. Later that night, I sat in a budget hotel room in Queens, still wearing my damp funeral clothes and trying to process what had happened. I had managed to grab my purse before being thrown out, but everything else I owned was still in that mansion, probably being packed up by staff and donated to charity as I sat there. The rain continued to streak down the single window, creating shifting patterns of shadow and light across the worn carpet. As I searched through my purse for my phone, my fingers found something unexpected. A fountain pen that I hadn't remembered putting there. It was my grandfather's favorite Mont Blanc, the one he had always used to sign important documents. I pulled it out and examined it in the lamplight, confused about how it had ended up in my purse. Then I remembered. 3 weeks before his death, when grandfather had seemed more tired than usual, he had pressed the pen into my hands after one of our regular Sunday lunches. His words came back to me now with startling clarity. "When you need answers the most, remember our first lesson." Our first lesson. I turned the pen over in my hands, remembering how grandfather had taught me to look for hidden value in everything, to never accept that something was exactly what it appeared to be. The pen felt heavier than it should, and when I examined the barrel more closely, I found a small section that twisted away to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a small safety deposit box key and a piece of paper with a message written in grandfather's careful handwriting, "Where my greatest failure became my greatest lesson." I stared at the cryptic message, my mind racing. Grandfather had never spoken of failures, but he had once mentioned a building he had tried to purchase early in his career, a deal that had fallen through and taught him valuable lessons about due diligence and patience. It was an old bank building in the financial district, a place he had driven past occasionally when he wanted to remind himself never to make the same mistakes twice. After spending a sleepless night in that hotel room, I called Ben Carter, my grandfather's longtime personal assistant who had been fired by Marcus that same afternoon. Ben had worked for the Vance family for 15 years, and his loyalty to my grandfather was absolute. When I explained what had happened and showed him the pen, his eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. "I was wondering when you would find that," he said quietly. "Mr. Jonathan gave me instructions about what to do if anything happened to him, and Marcus showed his true colors. I have a car outside." The old Merchants Trust building sat on a quiet street in Lower Manhattan, its facade weathered but still dignified after decades of changing ownership. Ben led me through the marble lobby to the safety deposit box vault, where the key from grandfather's pen opened box number 847. Inside was a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax, along with several legal documents that made my hands tremble as I read them. The envelope contained a letter in my grandfather's handwriting and a copy of his real will, completely different from the one Marcus had probably already filed with the probate court. As I read the documents, I felt the world shift around me once again. But this time the change brought hope instead of despair. According to the real will, the $400 million estate was placed in an irrevocable trust with conditions that would make Marcus's victory celebration painfully premature. To access any of the money, Marcus and I would have to work together to complete grandfather's final project, transforming an abandoned industrial complex in Brooklyn into a state-of-the-art technology and community center called the Vance Legacy Hub. I would serve as co-executive director with full veto power over all financial decisions. But the most important clause was what the legal documents called the termination provision. If Marcus attempted to sabotage the project or harm me in any way, or if the project failed due to his negligence or misconduct, the entire inheritance would transfer to me automatically. Marcus would receive nothing. The letter from my grandfather explained everything. He had known about Marcus's true nature for years, had seen how my father treated business partners, employees, and family members when he thought no one was watching. The elaborate plan was designed to give Marcus one final chance to prove he could act with honor and integrity, while ensuring that I would inherit the family legacy regardless of the outcome. He was always 10 steps ahead, Ben said as we sat in his car outside the bank. Your grandfather knew this day would come, and he made sure you would be ready for it. The next morning, I walked into Marcus's office wearing a charcoal gray power suit I had purchased with money from selling a few pieces of jewelry my grandfather had given me over the years. Ben had arranged for the family's longtime attorney, Margaret Stern, to accompany me. The receptionist tried to stop us, but Margaret's reputation preceded her, and we were shown into the corner office where Marcus was meeting with his financial advisors. My father was in the middle of explaining his plans for the inheritance money when I walked in and placed the real will on his conference table. The color drained from his face as Margaret calmly explained the legal situation to the assembled group. Marcus went through the full spectrum of emotions in less than 5 minutes: disbelief, anger, panic, and finally a kind of trapped calculation as he realized he had no choice but to comply. You want the money? I said, looking directly into his eyes. Then you'll work for it. Under my terms. What followed was 3 months of the most intense psychological warfare I had ever experienced. Marcus tried every trick in his considerable arsenal to undermine my authority and sabotage the project from within. He questioned my decisions in meetings, tempted to hire subcontractors with histories of cutting corners, and constantly reminded everyone that I lacked his decades of business experience. But grandfather had taught me well. I had spent summers working in his business, learning not just the financial side, but the human side of major projects. I knew how to read people, how to spot dishonesty, and how to build consensus among different stakeholders. When Marcus tried to push through a construction contract with a company known for cost overruns, I presented the board with a detailed analysis showing how my alternative would save $2 million while delivering higher quality results. Serafina, meanwhile, launched her own campaign of sabotage. She leaked selective information to a financial blogger, painting me as an inexperienced young woman who was in over her head and putting the entire project at risk. The blog posts were carefully crafted to create doubt without making specific accusations that could be legally challenged. I discovered the source of the leaks through a combination of digital forensics and old-fashioned detective work. Rather than confronting Serafina directly, I used the evidence to force Marcus to give me complete operational control of the project. The choice was simple: either he handed over day-to-day management to me, or I would present the evidence of his wife's interference to the trust's board of directors. As the project neared completion, I could see desperation creeping into Marcus's behavior. The Vance Legacy Hub was not just meeting its targets. It was exceeding them. The technology incubator had attracted startups from across the Northeast. The community center was already serving thousands of families, and the entire complex was being hailed as a model for urban renewal. My father's dreams of easy money were slipping away, replaced by the reality that I had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. That's when Marcus made his final, desperate play. Ben overheard a phone conversation between my father and a materials supplier. A conversation that made it clear Marcus was planning to create an accident that would delay the project past its 12-month deadline. A critical shipment of specialized steel beams would be delayed due to quality control issues, pushing our completion date beyond the trust's requirements and voiding the inheritance completely. I had less than 48 hours to act. Using every contact I had developed over the months of construction, plus some creative financing that would have made grandfather proud, I arranged for an emergency shipment from a supplier in Germany. The cost was astronomical, requiring me to put up my own assets as collateral. But the materials arrived just hours before Marcus's sabotage could take effect. The grand opening of the Vance Legacy Hub took place on a bright October morning, exactly 11 months and 29 days after grandfather's death. Politicians, business leaders, and media representatives filled the main atrium. The same crowd that had attended the funeral that felt like a lifetime ago. Marcus stood on the stage in another expensive suit, preparing to give the speech that would mark his triumph and claim his inheritance. That's when Margaret Stern stepped to the microphone and asked for everyone's attention. The large screens around the atrium flickered to life, showing a recorded conversation between Marcus and the materials supplier who had agreed to delay our shipment. The audio was crystal clear, Marcus's voice unmistakable as he outlined his plan to sabotage his own daughter's work. The silence in the room was deafening as Margaret read the relevant section of grandfather's will. Due to Marcus's deliberate attempt to sabotage the project, the termination provision was triggered immediately. The entire $400 million inheritance, plus ownership of the Vance Legacy Hub itself, would transfer to me. I watched my father's face as the reality hit him. The man who had thrown me out into the rain less than a year ago was now standing in front of hundreds of people, exposed as someone willing to destroy his own daughter's work for money. Camera flashes lit up his shocked expression as reporters documented what would become one of the biggest inheritance scandals in New York history. Serafina had already disappeared into the crowd, her survival instincts apparently stronger than her loyalty. Marcus stood alone on that stage, a man who had lost everything because he never understood that some things matter more than money. When I stepped up to the microphone, I felt the weight of 4 generations of Vance legacy behind me. My grandfather's real inheritance was never about money, I said to the assembled crowd. It was about building something that lasts. Something that helps people create better lives for themselves and their families. Today, that legacy truly begins. Later that evening, I stood in my new office on the top floor of the Vance Legacy Hub, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline. Ben had accepted my offer to serve as the facility's executive director. And together we were already planning expansions that would create thousands more jobs and opportunities. The trust fund would ensure that the work continued for generations. But more importantly, I had proven to myself that I was worthy of my grandfather's faith. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father's attempt to destroy me had ultimately given me everything he had wanted for himself. But unlike Marcus, I understood that real power doesn't come from taking what others have built. It comes from creating something valuable and sharing it with the world. As I packed up my things to leave that first day as the official head of the Vance Empire, I found myself thinking about the frightened young woman who had sat in a hotel room in Queens less than a year ago. She had been lost, broken, and betrayed by the people who should have protected her. But she had also carried within her everything she needed to rebuild her life and claim her rightful place in the world. The rain had stopped, and through my office windows, I could see the lights of Manhattan twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably trying to figure out how to salvage his reputation and his finances. Serafina was likely already looking for her next wealthy mark. But their problems were no longer mine to solve or worry about. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they really are. My father had intended to destroy me. But instead, he had set me free to become who I was always meant to be. The girl who had been thrown out into the rain was gone forever, replaced by a woman who would never again allow anyone to make her feel small or worthless. The Vance Legacy Hub hummed with activity around me, filled with entrepreneurs chasing dreams, families building better futures, and young people learning skills that would change their lives. This was grandfather's real inheritance, and now it was mine to protect and grow. I had not just survived my father's betrayal. I had transformed it into the foundation for something extraordinary. As I turned off the lights and headed home to my new apartment overlooking Central Park, I realized that revenge truly was a dish best served cold. But the sweetest revenge of all was success, especially when it came from becoming the person your enemies never believed you could be.